Alameda County,
Here.
Albany, Berkeley,
Here.
Dublin,
Here.
Fremont,
Here.
Hayward,
Here.
Livermore,
Here.
Oakland, is expected late, Piedmont,
Here.
San Leandro,
Present.
Union City,
Here.
Community Advisory Committee. Thank you, you have a forum.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I just want to say thank you to the alternates that are here tonight. Appreciate you coming and helping us achieve quorum. Next item would be to have Mr. Well to lead us in the pledge. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Public comment, a time in which you can speak to anything that is not on today's agenda. Jessica Tovar. How are you?
So you may or may not have seen the letter from East Bay Clean Power Alliance. We are asking you to support the early closure of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. And we would like you to add this to a future agenda to support its closure at the California Public Utilities Commission. Why? Because keeping Diablo Canyon open actually costs Community Choice customers a lot more through the PCIA. In addition, costs a lot more to customers who are not Community Choice customers in California. We do have a calculation in the back of our letter that shows that actually through the PCIA, that this kind of energy, the energy that we've been talking about, the nuclear specifically, is costing us about $90 million per year. It is not a savings to Community Choice. It affects all utility ratepayers. So we are actually asking you to go further in actually supporting the closure of the Diablo nuclear power plant. So A, we don't have to have this problem of talking about nuclear again in the future, but also to relieve that burden from all ratepayers, Community Choice, and those not in Community Choice territory.
Thank you, Jessica. So at this point, our esteemed chair has arrived, so we'll turn it to him for on the consent calendar.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Maybe if I turn it back on, these will be done.
Testing. There we go.
You gotta talk right into them.
Testing. I think we're good. Okay. Thank you, Supervisor Haggerty, sorry I'm late. I know Councilor Martinez is unable to be here, she's excused for tonight as well. We're on a consent calendar. That was public comment, is that right? General public comment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So consent calendar, does anybody have any questions or want to pull any items off the consent agenda? There are 4 items on the consent agenda, and we will take public comment if there are any for that, those items, and we have staff information for consent agenda as well.
Yeah, I wanted to note that we had intended to include the marketing update within the, currently within the CEO of North Long consent agenda, and so we'll add that to the consent agenda.
Well, we can't do that. If it's on non-consent, you can't move it to consent, saying that.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I appreciate the spirit.
Yes.
I'll move consent.
Okay, we have a move consent, and I see no public comment on any of the consent items, and I see no other questions or comments on either any of the consent items. All in favor of, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Member Fremont. Second. Oh, second, I'm sorry. Moved and seconded already. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any objections or abstentions on the consent items? Hearing none, that's adopted unanimously of all those present. And we'll move on to our CEO report, item 8.
So for the CEO report, I wanted to first introduce a new staff member to our team. Her name is Stephanie Tannenhaus. She joins us as the Principal Regulatory Analyst. And Stephanie joins EBCE from Energy and Environmental Economics, where she focused on distributed and system-wide resource planning and economic evaluation. Prior to E3, Stephanie helped develop PG&E's strategy and positions on renewable energy policies and worked on the implementation of California's climate policies for the NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council. She received an MS in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Stanford University and a BS in Biomedical Engineering from Washington University in St. Louis. Stephanie lives in Oakland with her husband and 3 pets, 2 of which came from southern Arizona, where she co-founded a nonprofit that provides programming to kids living on both sides of the border. Stephanie, please stand and say hi.
Welcome.
Welcome. For the second item, we have the marketing account services update. As I noted, we had intended to try to include that under the consent agenda, and so I won't intend to give a summary here of all those details, but it's there for your review. And just highlight a couple items under the marketing and outreach highlights. Perhaps the most noteworthy is the joint rate mailer went out at the beginning of December of 2019. And so that was about 510,000 mailers that went out to all of our customers. Under account service highlights, I think the big one maybe is just the first one, the NEM enrollment. The final notice was set in January, so at this stage, our sort of full enrollment is completed, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, which was the NEM enrollments that were spread across 2019. And then last, certainly not least, under the public engagement highlights, I did want to highlight new board members that were identified. So for the City of Pleasanton, we have Councilmember Jerry Penton, and the alternate is Councilmember Kathy Narm. For Newark, we have Councilmember Mike Hannon and Mayor Ellen Nagy. And then Tracy, of course, is still voting on that to determine the appointments. Are any of the new members here this evening? Apologies if I haven't been introduced yet.
Looks like they're not here. If we can make sure we reach out to them to make sure they know when it's official, or and make sure they feel invited to come to our board meetings and full participation. Great. Okay, is that the entire report?
It is, yes.
Okay. Anything more? Right. There's no action on that. So we'll move to Community Advisory Committee report. Mary?
So I don't have a whole lot to say at this point, because we actually spent a fair amount of our time talking about the nuclear allocation. I'll have more comment from the CAC on that during the agenda item. We did truncate some of our other discussion, so we can talk about that. And that's it for today.
Okay. Thank you. And we should always remind ourselves and thank our entire Community Advisory Committee for them volunteering their time and being so helpful to moving this agency forward. So thank you very much for that. Please send our thanks to the rest of the committee as well. Occasionally someone will show up, but really you're representative, so we appreciate all the work you all are all doing. Okay, item 10, our Treasury report.
Treasury report is an informational item about EBC's cash position. All the information I'll state is as of quarter end, so December 31st, 2019, end of the year. And it's a summary of our sort of cash balances. So I won't read off every number under our 6 various accounts within River City Bank. But the total there you can see is $131,237,441. And that is an increase quarter over quarter of approximately $32 million, where we ended the prior quarter around close to $99 million. So continues to be healthy. In terms of summary of the cash that was received into our lockbox, you can see a breakdown of our October through December cash inflows there. The total there being approximately $138 million. Moving on, the current outstanding low balance that we have, the Barclays credit facility continues to be $0, so nothing outstanding there. Our current collateral and customer prepayments that is held is $300,000. I anticipate that will be returned, which was part of our down to a balance of $0, but currently at $300,000. And then you can see our customer delinquencies, and that is as of January 6, 2020. Under the 30 to 60 days delayed in payments amounts to about $1.4 million. The 60 to 90 day delay is approximately $200,000, and then the 90 plus days is close to $1.9 million. In terms of other highlights, really just a recap of a couple big items from the last meeting. One is that we amended our credit facility with Barclays from $50 million to $80 million. That was item 12 of the last board meeting in December. And then the other item is we did a formal allocation of revenues into the reserve funds totaling $40,513,687, which represents about 10.5% of our prior fiscal year revenues, and that was item 14 in our December board meeting.
Okay, any questions? Supervisor Haggerty?
So, what, are these delinquencies considered, and I hate to use this word, but normal compared to other agencies? And, I mean, to me, that's a lot of money. What are we doing to get this number down?
So I would say generally speaking, they are normal in our conversation with other CCAs and speaking with SMUD, our billing agent. So these are not rising to the level of any particular concerns. That's also in conjunction with discussing with our accountant where we have certain set-asides, assuming that there will be amounts that we won't be able to collect. These amounts, while they are identified, it is important to note that these balances have changed and fluctuated up and down a little bit. And so even though there are some amounts that are extending in duration, there are opportunities to continue to collect that in the sort of normal course of business where customers are late but still paying. So we're not taking very explicit action right now to try to go out there and collect that outside of the normal process. We did present, I believe it was in the December board meeting, for our regular delinquency policy. So I think from that policy, that's what we're trying to follow still, and haven't taken explicit sort of collections actions to date, but we're sort of letting this sort of run its course a little bit more, given the volumes do look, they're not small numbers, but in the grand scheme of the revenue that we collect, they're a very small percentage, and so they're actually below what we sort of forecast in our budget.
So what would happen to this if we added another column instead of 120?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, so I can bring that back to the board.
Oh, wait, it wouldn't change because it's 90 plus days, right?
Yeah, that's true. It would be a carve out of that one point.
So it'd be part, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
all right.
But I would suspect that would be a fairly significantly smaller number, but I'm just sort of guessing that, to be honest.
Jesse?
So following up on Supervisor Hagerty's question, for those accounts that have been significantly delinquent, you would sort of remind us about the policy. I guess it goes to collections. What happens if they still don't pay or they're extending in circumstances that make it difficult for them?
So we don't explicitly have a collections agency that we work with that would go out there and seek collection of those accounts receivable separate. I think the policy allows us to take action there, and to date we have not done that. And that's in part because relatively new agency, the dollar levels are relatively small as a percentage, and because the balances have actually gone down in some cases in certain accounts, we've sort of let it run its course a little bit more. I think we would anticipate bringing back something to the board if we intended to take some action and go seek a sort of third-party collection
So
agency.
somebody due to, health crisis or economic circumstances is finding it difficult for them to pay their bills, what do you do?
The policy does not have an explicit carve-out for those types of customers that are maybe facing some particular challenges that we can bring something back to the board after sort of reviewing the accounts and understanding
Yeah,
what
I'd
the
be curious
situation
to
is,
know
but
what are some of the circumstances that lead people to be delinquent?
sure, yeah. And with the information that we have to date, we don't necessarily have that level of detail to understand understanding exactly why are those customers not able to pay. So I think, maybe it's an action for us to maybe think about how do we gather that information to better understand our customers. To date, we've been trying to just sort of follow that policy, which leaves, some open-endedness in terms of how we can take actions and proceed. And so we'll maybe get a little bit more data to inform additional actions.
One more issue, Mr. Chair.
Right.
On the reserves, so this is the first time we've actually allocated money to the reserves. Yes, what is our goal, or reserve goal, and what is our goal to achieve sufficient credit rating? We're in the second year of operations. I understand that we've audited books in order for us to be eligible for a credit rating. So could you maybe explain what is our goal and how do we get to achieving a credit rating?
Absolutely. So there's a few elements to getting a credit rating. I'll say, while there have been a couple credit ratings that have already been achieved by other CCAs, the process is still being defined and refined by the various credit rating agencies, Moody's being one of them. And so that's not by any means set in stone, but some of the main highlights that have been provided to us to target are, one is just time. So our understanding is 3 years of operational history is important. Unfortunately, that's not something that you can sort of expedite in the process. That is a critical aspect. Another one is cash and liquidity metrics. And there are a variety of liquidity metrics that the credit rating agencies can look at. One of the important ones is days liquidity on hand. And so that looks at a specific cash metric and your sort of annual forecasted expense as well, to understand what kind of liquidity you have to cover your expenses for the year. There's not a single number to say that's the number, you hit it, and you have an investment grade credit rating. There are quite a number of sort of qualitative as well as quantitative factors that get coupled with that. As you can imagine, credit rating agencies are hesitant to say, oh, 120 days, that's the magic number, hit it, you're done. There's a little bit more subjectivity to it that they sort of put out there, and they review your credit facility to understand actually, how available is that liquidity, is it encumbered in any way? So there's elements like that. In terms of the reserve itself, which is maybe why you're bringing up here on that particular bullet, in our reserve policy, we do have particular targets for each of those subcategories. And so, over time, we'll certainly hopefully achieve those numbers. Those are not necessarily explicitly tied to a credit rating metric, though we've certainly done that sort of as a proxy for what we think is liquidity that's necessary to get that investment grade rating.
And just the last question, is this an unallocated reserve balance at this time, or have we allocated to the respective kind of sub-reserve?
Those are allocated. I don't remember off the top of my head where they are broken out, but in that prior item, there certainly is the waterfall, and each sub-item line item is broken out there. But the aggregate is approximately $40 million.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Information report. Any other questions, comments? Okay. And I see no public speakers. No. We're good. Okay. So we'll move on to the next item. That'll be item 11. Melissa.
Good evening. Here to talk to you tonight about EB 1839, which is a bill that Bob Mata, our assembly member in this area, has introduced into the assembly. This bill would add a section to the Public Resources Code to create the California Green New Deal. And essentially, right now, it's still very much a framework bill. It lays out certain objectives and certain values, and then it lays out a council made up of a number of state agencies that would then advise the legislature on how to do more as a legislature to adopt those ideals. A lot of those ideals actually fit fairly nicely with what we at EBCE are trying to accomplish, and for that reason, I'm recommending that we support this bill. In fact, we are working with Assemblymember Bonta's office. He has convened a stakeholder group with a number of environmental and EJ and labor groups to inform him on this bill as it moves forward. And EBCE recently joined that process as well. So we feel like we're getting to work closely with the office in development of this. We think that it's a positive thing for Alameda County and our residents. for that reason, would recommend taking a support position, even though it's a little bit early on.
Thank you. We do have one public speaker, and then we can have some discussion up here. Jessica Tovar. It's been moved and seconded, but we'll hear from the public.
So just on behalf of East Bay Clean Power Alliance, many of our partner organizations are in this effort, working with Rob Bonta on this California Green New Deal. So we do support it, and we urge you to support it as well. Thanks.
Okay, appreciate it very much. Colleagues, Councilor McDowell.
So, sounds like a good thing. The only thing that gave me pause was the language that says that all residents have a right to certain things. I'm assuming this isn't meant to be like an enforceable right where people could sue if we're not providing 100% clean energy or something like that. It's meant to be aspirational and goal.
That's right, and it's supposed to inform future state action.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. A vote's been motioned and seconded. So all in favor of endorsing this legislation, please say aye.
Aye.
Any objections or abstentions? Seeing none, that's unanimous of all those who are present. Thank you so much. Will we have next month we'll have a more in-depth legislative report? We don't know a lot of new bills yet.
Right, it's still early on. We will have the presentation of the executive committee on Friday, as well as at the next marketing and regulatory legislative subgroup.
Great. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. We're going to move to item 12. And JP. How you doing?
Good evening, Chief Ross, Director of Local Development. So I'm here tonight to talk through our local development activities. As you may recall, our plan is to do 4 meetings where we're reviewing our local development activities, 2 to the full board, 1 during our budgeting process in June, and then 1 here in mid-year review. And then we do 2 updates to executive during the other quarters when we're not doing this. So I provided a staff report that I provided a staff report which details all of the program activities that we're currently in operation, as well as planned for the remainder of this fiscal year. And have reserved the presentation tonight to talk about some of our more major initiatives. So all of the activities are in detail with a pretty comprehensive narrative in the staff report, and then go through some of the bigger line items and program areas tonight. So this first slide is the budget areas. What we've done is we've lined out the activities and the local development program areas by activities that are either spent or contracted to be spent, and then those that are planned. A couple things that I would note on this budget, this does tally up to the budget that was allocated and approved in the June board meeting, which included the $1.5 million that the board recommended we add to the budget this year, as well as the $500,000 additional budget that the board approved at the November board meeting for our medical baseline program, which I'll describe the progress we've made on that tonight. In this budget, we also have a couple of additional line items at the bottom of this chart. One, to account for our staffing costs, which was requested from the board so that we show the local hires. That doesn't come from the actual operating budget that we spend, but it is spent locally. And then highlighted a program activity that we are planning on, which is actually using our reserve plans to use our reserve funds. So as you'll recall, we get an annual budget from our operating budget. We also, as part of the waterfall for our reserve funds, we have our local development reserve, which is 1% of operating revenues goes into our reserve. That reserve is not spent to be spent, it's spent to then be recovered through some mechanism so that the reserve fund grows over time. So I'll talk about that, but those are a couple of other line items that we've added to the budget, even though they don't come out of the allocated budget that was approved by the board. Another thing to note is, you'll notice that there's nothing under enhanced NEM in this current budget. And what we have kind of realized is we're starting to focus on some larger program elements. Vehicle electrification is large, building electrification is large, and we're actually doing a lot on resilience. And that resilience activity is really kind of utilizing the budgets on both collaborative procurement, because we're going out with solicitations and using those solicitations to use our buying power and volume to deliver more solar and storage to our customers. And then, that's also creating basically an incentive program for resource adequacy, which will help deliver more solar and storage to our customers. So that's kind of the enhanced NEM. It's a way to deliver more solar and storage to our customers. So those are really kind of outlined in the staff report under resilience. It's not that we aren't doing anything to support net metered systems, it's that we're doing it in kind of a different way, and I'll describe that. And then lastly, I will note, this budget there's still another $1 million that we have been allocated for this year that we have not yet earmarked for a program. And I'll say, it takes a lot to do, I think, good programs and get good programs underway. And so those dollars, be sure we will spend wisely, but they're not currently here because we still have to get them allocated to something that fits within the local development business plan. And those will be delivered, but they're not here now. And I want to make sure that we are putting our energy and effort and dollars into things that we know we can deliver and can deliver. So with that, I will talk through some of the major initiatives. So under the rubric of resilience and our collaborative procurement activities, we have our critical facilities, critical municipal facilities program. This is the Bay Area Air Quality Management District grant funded activity that we're doing in both Alameda and San Mateo County, contracted with A-Root as a consultant. And we are now in the process of evaluating 500 critical facilities across these two counties, where it's possible to site solar and storage to make those facilities resilient. So we've reached out to staff at all of your cities and received lists of buildings that each of your cities has defined as critical. We're evaluating those, and we're now actually at the point where we've done the technical analysis on these buildings. We've come back to your staff with a short list of those buildings and are going through the process of identifying which are the priority buildings for solar and storage to make those facilities resilient. And we'll plan to go out with a solicitation later in the spring once this activity is completed, so that we can go out to the market, to the solar and storage developers, and get bids for adding solar and storage to the critical facilities that we've identified with your cities. In the interim, we'll be going out with an RFI, request for information, to the private sector to help define what's the best way to install solar and storage on municipal facilities, especially existing solar systems. Lots of your facilities already have solar on them, and putting batteries and retrofitting batteries onto those systems can be difficult. So getting the best information that's available on how we can retrofit those systems is important. So we want to make sure that RFP goes out and is well educated. So that's our critical facilities work. We also have our medical baseline program. So we were allocated the additional $500,000 in November. Since then, we've brought on board a consultant, A-Root, who is actually the same consultant we were working with on our critical facilities work. They have a lot of experience here. And we've initiated our pilot program, which is to deliver solar and storage for homeowners who have children who are dependent who are medically dependent on equipment in their homes for their medical needs. And the goal there is to get systems installed on those homes by September. And if you work back from September, that's actually an incredibly tight timeline. we've already met with a local hospital who has commenced doing outreach through their specialty clinics to the patients who have children who might be dependent, and they've already started delivering us back the numbers by city of families with those particular patients. So this is obviously very kind of complicated, and there's a lot of privacy information around HIPAA and other things like that, so we're really trying to work through that on an expedited timeline because it's really tight between now and September. So that's the pilot program portion of our medical baseline work, and we're also kicking off the more comprehensive program. So solar and storage for homes is one solution, but there's a wide variety of solutions for our medical baseline customers in order to provide them resilience in light of increased grid outages. So those two elements of that program have kicked off already. And lastly, we have on the resilience front, we have our procurement that we issued a solicitation in November to deliver solar plus storage systems to homes and businesses to make those homes and businesses more resilient and provide backup power during ESPS events. We did that with 3 other LSEs, 2 CCAs, and Silicon Valley Power, Santa Clara, Palo Alto, and are now in the process of, we just actually shortlisted 10 companies today. We're setting up interviews with those companies who have provided bids to us for systems that can island and provide us with resource adequacy as a commodity that we need. So we're quite excited about that. Got some really interesting proposals for both commercial segments and residential segments, as well as cell phone towers, which is something that was brought up to us in light of the PSPS events. Cell phone towers go out, these people can't communicate. So we got a good proposal from a party who wants to provide backup power to cell phone towers, which I think is quite interesting and necessary. So on building electrification, I'll run through a few of our building electrification activities. Reach codes is something that we've been supporting across our cities for almost a year now. It's one of the first campaigns we kicked off. We have about 8 cities that are pursuing reach codes. The Emeryville line is blank, but we've actually done, I think, a sustainability committee meeting and another workshop to support Emeryville's activities. And the reach codes that have been proposed by and large fall in 2 categories. One is electrifying new construction for new single-family and multifamily commercial developments that are going in, having those go in either without natural gas or with heavily prioritizing all electric. And then the second is electric vehicle codes that require a higher proportion of parking spaces to have to be pre-wired for electric vehicles, or a higher proportion of spaces to actually have electric vehicle charging infrastructure installed during construction. And then a third category is on existing buildings and retrofits. So this is one of the initiatives that we led on, which was to help define a cost-effective pathway for retrofitting existing buildings and making them all electric, because many of our communities are already quite built out, so new construction is good, but we also really need to work on electrifying existing buildings. So that process is going quite well. Most of our cities are planning on passing codes in the next couple of months, and then we have kind of a follow-on set of activities to support implementation. So the last thing you want to do is help pass codes and then kind of leave people hanging. So we also have our consultants online to help with implementation support with our planning department so that can roll out as smoothly as possible. We also have a program underway to provide technical assistance for our for multifamily development. So much of the new construction that is going on the residential side in our built communities is kind of high-rise multifamily. That's a lot of what's going in. Where there's single-family homes are less frequent. And there really has not been a good pathway through the California Energy Commission's process to allow for all-electric high-rise multifamily. And so we're trying to get in front of the developers who have these buildings in the planning and permitting processes and provide them with some technical understand how to do heat pump hot water heating and heat pump space heating in these facilities. The technology is actually pretty new, and not a lot of developers, not a lot of contractors have experience with it. There are a few parties in the Bay who do have experience with it, so we're matching them up. We just had a meeting with the Fremont Planning Department this week. We're reaching out to the planning department so that we can use the planning and permitting departments as a channel to get to these developers, have some leverage to get in front of these buildings and have them be all electric instead of gas. Obviously, from a greenhouse gas perspective, that's quite positive. It also creates lower EBCE, if you like. That program is progressing. And this is one of our planned programs for the spring of this year, is to provide a consumer incentive for heat pump hot water heaters. So heat pump hot water heaters are still pretty immature. They're quite common in Europe, less so in the United States. There's not a lot of contractors who are familiar with them, not a lot of permitting departments that are familiar with them. Bay Area Air Quality Management District has actually provided some funding to stop waste, to put together a platform, a regional platform across the Bay Area counties for different LSEs such as ourselves to provide incentives to distributors and installers to help bring down the price of heat pump hot water heaters. So our plan is to put some money into that. I guess there's an Amber Alert going on. So our plan is to put some incentive dollars into this program, and that's really kind of a kickstarting program because within the next couple of years there will be considerable incentive dollars flowing into electrification and heat pump hot water heaters through SB 1477, and then there's another bill that just passed. So we want to make sure that Alameda County's kind of market for heat pump hot water heaters is ready, because right now there's just not a lot of experience, and so you can flood the market with dollars, but if the contractors aren't ready and people aren't familiar with the technology, then it stumbles for a while. So we want to make sure we kind of prime the pump for those programs to come into effect over the next 24 months. And then induction cooking. So as you may have heard, there's been a lot of movement on electrification, and some of the major pushback to electrification initiatives and Berkeley's natural gas ban has actually come from the restaurant industry. So the first lawsuit against Berkeley's ban was from the restaurant industry saying, that cooks can't cook in all electric kitchens, they need to have gas. Induction cooking and cooking is something that people are quite tied to. People don't really care how their hot water gets heated or their space conditioning is made, but they really love their gas cooktops and gas ranges. And induction cooking is really a new technology that can deliver speed and safety and value to both residential and commercial residents and chefs. And so our induction cooking campaign is really focused on a couple of market segments. One is providing education and outreach and some kind of test kitchen environments at farmers markets where people can interact with induction cooking. And then also to provide, we've been looking at an electric food truck that we could develop and sponsor to allow local chefs to test out induction cooking in all electric kitchens in an environment where they can then deliver and sell the meals that they're making and cook on in an electric kitchen. And we also looked at a pop-up restaurant environment where we can bring in chefs from around the county and sponsor an all-electric kitchen so that chefs from around the county can come in, cook on that electric environment, and really kind of have a multi-pronged approach for showing both residents and chefs how induction cooking works and how an all-electric kitchen can meet their needs. So we've also been.
Go ahead.
been some concern about convection ovens and pregnant women. How are you addressing that?
That's the first I've heard of it, so I'm not addressing it in any way, but I could definitely look into it. As far as I know, a convection oven is just an oven with a fan. So, but I can certainly check it out, but that's the first I've heard of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Continue.
The LDBP identified energy efficiency as a target area, but recognized that there's a lot of dollars already at play in the energy efficiency space through public purpose funds. We've identified, or we are trying to identify, kind of cost-effective opportunities for energy efficiency where we can use our monies to target efficiency or conservation or load shifting from the hours that cost us the most money. As a procurement agency, the cost of energy is not the same all hours of the day and all months of the year. There are particular hours, especially in the summer, that are very expensive. So we have contracted with a company called Recurve, who has been in the energy efficiency space for a while, and we've actually run the interval data from all of our meters through Recurve's analytics systems, and are now able to filter our customers based on a whole series of elements. And what that allows us to do is to look at targeting customers who can most benefit from particular energy efficiency or conservation programs. So the graph here is a cut of our residential load profile and looking at customers who use the most energy at the most expensive times. So this is basically looking at customers who have high afternoon peaks in the summer. And the blue line is those customers the average usage from those customers who we filtered for. The red dotted line is the average customer load profile, and the gray line is the line of the customers who we didn't filter for. And the message here is if you target your energy efficiency opportunities at the customers who use the most, what's going to happen if they respond? You get the most savings. Traditionally, a lot of energy efficiency programs have been pretty shotgun. You send a bunch of mailers, and you might be having people participate in the program who don't actually use a lot of energy at the time you care about reducing energy. That's not the way we want to do it. So we're now looking at this data and starting to run it through the analytics engine so that we can deliver some pay-for-performance solicitations to the market where we can actually get energy efficiency at the times where procuring energy costs us the most. So we're pretty excited about kicking this off and starting to learn from that program. So now we'll talk a little bit about vehicle electrification. It's another big category. So for us, one of the main things that we've been doing is working towards an electric vehicle incentive program launch year in 2021. So the California Energy Commission has state funding that they have been providing to different counties, about 2-3 years into it now. And the county of Alameda actually has the biggest gap between the number of vehicles that we are expected to have and the number of chargers and charging infrastructure that we currently have. So that's a big gap. We're slated to have about 86,000 electric vehicles by 2025. We're about 30,000 now. We need a lot of charging infrastructure in order to provide the electric fuel for those vehicles. So we've submitted a letter of intent to the California Energy Commission, and we're working with them on that LOI such that we've requested that the CEC give us $30 million. In exchange, we would also be investing some portion of our funding. Right now, the proposal is $16 million, so $4 million a year for 4 years from 2021 on, if we're approved. So we're working through that process with the CEC, and we've been identifying how we would start to implement those dollars. So one of the things we've done is the picture on the right is a map of our multi-unit dwellings. So electric vehicle charging is difficult for people who don't own their own home. And so identifying where our multi-unit dwellings are, the hotspots of where those dwellings are co-located, and thinking about how we would then deliver charging infrastructure to those locations so that people who live in LEDs, as well as can charge their vehicles is one of the priorities that we have for this program. And one of the things that we've done with the budget for this year is put $1.5 million from this year's budget into an account that would go towards that $16 million budget that we forecasted.
Supervisor Haggard.
Yeah, so I would agree with you, a lot of discussions around EV charging at the Air District is clearly around how do we get more chargers into the multi-unit dwellings. However, a couple comments. First of all, this map, I mean, I hope we don't ever show this map again at EBCE because it leaves off Livermore. And if I was representative from Livermore, which she's now looking, I'd be upset. But it also shows a glaring problem in the 580 corridor, and I would hope that we concentrate in there. And I would say that the multi-unit dwellings are not always the best place to put them. For example, I know in the city of Fremont, the old Hub Shopping Center, they have a tremendous amount of chargers, mostly Tesla, I will say. And what I've found is, what Tesla has done is they're on major corridors, but they're partnering with like shopping malls and things like that, and then people go in and charge there. So I wouldn't get so hung up just on the multi-unit dwellings. I would also look to some of these areas, because, for example, if I wanted to charge and I needed to go into Montage to charge in Livermore, Montage may not want me there. So that could be a problem. So what I'm saying is, I think we should be looking more to the major corridors, and are there, like large parking lots that we can put chargers where people can charge and more accessible to everybody, including the multi-unit dwellings. So I wouldn't get so hung up on that. Okay?
Thanks for that, and apologies for not having the entire service territory.
I just couldn't figure out how to get home because I don't know where I live.
And I'll say that we're not actually looking at siting chargers in multi-unit dwellings. The idea is that we are looking at where multi-unit dwellings are as one element of a decision on where you site charging. And those chargers would not be just for MEDs, but they would be for people who need to charge, which includes people who live in MEDs and others. But this is not the only defining factor of where we'd be looking to prioritize.
That's the source of my comments.
Yes.
Have a broader idea of where to go.
Yes, and this is not the only layer that we're looking at.
Okay.
So, thank you for pointing that out. I can totally,
Got your back.
thank you. So,
What I'm wondering is, have you gone to each of the city staff to ask them where good spots might be? For example, as I'm thinking about Livermore, I'm thinking of at least 3 or 4 spots, which would be public access, high volume, and highly, where I've been asked whether or not we have chargers for the construction zone.
Right, so we certainly are. We actually have another activity that's underway supporting fleet electrification for our cities that we're currently in conversations with multiple cities on, and have been requesting feedback from city staff around these particular 2 fleets. I think as we go through this is still this is a year away now, so there's actually a lot of work that we will do once we have been selected. We still haven't been selected from the CEC, so there's some amount of work that we'll do in pre-work to this, and then the selection notification should happen around June or so. We actually will not be in control of installing these chargers. It's an incentive program that is first come, first served to the development community. So our goal will be, once we actually see these, know that these funds will be made available, how do we kind of, again, feed the funnel and prime the pump for some of the areas where we want to see these chargers go in, where we think they'll have value, because we aren't the ones who are going to say they go here, here, and here. So we'll have some influence on that, but we won't be in total control.
One more thing, just to have another city's back, I'll point out Tracy, which is even further east, isn't on here either.
That's true. We made this map about 4 months ago. Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, is that only for new developments that you fund the program? Is that what no, okay.
No, not at all. The Cali VIP is a program that provides incentives on a first-come, first-served basis. So some portion of the funds will be allocated to DC fast chargers, and some portion for level 2s, like home chargers and slower chargers. And then those incentives will be available to EV developers and homeowners and fleet managers and other people who want to install EV chargers. There's nothing that's available. These don't provide incentives for home charging. It's really for fleet charging and DC fast chargers.
And they're gonna offer a grant to like low-income multifamily units to encourage those who maybe have that Lyft or Uber to have this trip start in those communities to encourage EV charging in that space. Could we do something like that with the multifamily developments?
Yeah, so one of our community innovation grants was for Ecology Action, and they're testing out a business model for installing level 1 chargers in multi-unit dwellings. That may be what you're calling. That was one of our community innovation grants. So if they prove that out and that becomes something that they can install for a low cost, which is what they're trying to prove, then we can see if that's something that we would want to fund and engage more with. Those are for level 1 chargers, which are not allowable through the electric vehicle incentive program. EBID is just for level 2 and DC fast chargers. So kind of two different things, but I think identifying the areas where there are a lot of electric vehicles, and then considering the electric vehicle growth, what are the other areas where we need to be investing in charging infrastructure to make sure that EVs are accessible for all of our constituents.
So what's the difference again between level 1 and level 2?
Level 1 is something you can just plug into a wall outlet, so that will, like on a EV, that could take a day or 2 to charge. So it's kind of a trickle charger. You plug it in every night and get a little bit out of it, but it's quite a bit slower than the level 2 and the DC fast charger.
Thank you. Any more? Jesse?
I just want to say that this plan is really incredible and it's multifaceted, looking at how we can advance the goals of the agency in a variety of ways, not only built-in electrification, decarbonization, looking at expanding our electric vehicle infrastructure, how we can sort of develop partnerships with local environmental and equity groups in the counties. So I think that's really important. And how we can also sort of leverage grant opportunities with the CEC and other state agencies to get this work. So I took note of a variety of initiatives that you outlined, where there could be potential grant funding or partnerships with local governments. Curious about the government innovation grants and what the timeline is for the launch of that program.
So we are Debbie told me this goes to launching our application. So I actually reviewed that with the technical advisory group yesterday. And so our plan is to put that into play, in motion within the next
So the charging locations, and I'm sure there's plenty of, we're not planning a little bit of research on this. So obviously people's homes is a place to charge, including multifamily homes. People's places of work, especially places of work that are not well served by transit, is another place people would want to charge. What people think of as, okay, they're not going to go to a service station, most likely, to charge. So where are the alternatives? Are there shopping centers that people don't shop as much? So where are those non-home, non-work places that people go to charge? Why do they want to do something else? And you mentioned fleets, company fleets, agency fleets. That's obviously important. And then, of course, beyond what we can do, but long hauls. Making sure people feel that it's a place to go 200 miles away or 300 miles away, and that requires other agencies such as ourselves to also be doing what we're doing with the state, of course. So I guess assume all these different locations or types of locations, are we as a state, are NGOs, are there people who are figuring out, okay, it's easy to say all of the above, but are they, okay, where should we invest our funds to emphasize charging stations, especially fast charging stations, to encourage more people to feel comfortable buying the vehicles? That's our goal, right?
Right.
Okay, so are we thinking about the where, which place is a little more important than the other places?
Right. So I think there's a couple answers to that. So one is the long haul EV charging has actually really been kind of under the bailiwick of Electrify America. So that was like a $2 billion settlement with Volkswagen for Dieselgate. And they have been investing those dollars into kind of long haul vehicle on the main routes, actually across the whole country. And so there's been a lot of investment in that, including in the Bay Area. So we are certainly not the only ones doing this. The California Energy Commission itself is modeling out how many and where chargers should be going. And so we're taking our own view on that and saying, as we look at Alameda County, where should these chargers be going to meet our goals? I think that this is a very complex question, and certainly don't have all the answers now. We're putting limited resources into this to make sure that we can actually get the funds, and then once we've done that, we're going to spend quite a lot more time defining where we think those chargers should go.
Thanks.
So a couple more slides. So one of the elements that we've been doing in support of Cali VIP is our cities all need to be compliant with EB 1236, which is a expedited and transparent permitting process for EVs. So Jesse has been working with all of our cities to help make sure we get to a place where all of our cities are compliant with this. Making some progress on that as well. All of the cities need to do that in order for us to get these dollars from the Energy Commission. We also want to focus on medium and heavy duty. So light duty vehicles is one element, but medium and heavy duty, there's a lot of medium and heavy duty vehicle miles through our territory. Heavy duty, large long haul vehicles. Medium duty, there's a ton of medium duty in delivery vehicles, Amazon vehicles, cruise delivery, and so we don't have anything right now allocated for this. It's something we're planning, but we want to make sure that we're not only focused on light duty residential vehicles, but also medium heavy duty fleets, including collaborating with Ford, where we have a lot of long haul initiation.
Yeah, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I might be wrong on this one, but I just, there's something that's, maybe it's me in slides today, but I personally am not interested in helping Amazon at all. They can help themselves, and if they can't, Mr. Bezos, the richest man in the world, can help them. So I'm not, this isn't where I would go with this. The air district's doing some work with this, but I would rather, I noticed on slide 8, we're partnering with Stop Waste, and there was one other organization you mentioned. But I would rather us see us partner with ACTC and maybe do some bike ped projects. I think those are areas in which we can show benefit. I'm not sure what you mean by provide technical assistance to school districts. It's not that I think that, our transit agencies, they get a lot of help through grants, but I really believe if we could help close the gap on some bike ped projects. For example, I'll just pick one real quick. We're looking at trying to develop a trail between Fremont and Sonoma into Pleasanton. We certainly could use some help with something like that, where people could actually ride their bike from the house to work, and then maybe we wouldn't have such a congestion problem in Highway 84. So I would like us to take another look at this, because I think some of these people can help themselves, and I think if we could partner with ACTC, that might, on bike ped projects, I think that might go a long way.
So just, I would like to, on the Amazon piece, Amazon has actually already made the largest fleet procurement
As they should.
with Rivian to deliver these trucks. So our place in this is, are we providing charging? And, as we think about charging those vehicles, how and where are they being charged, and how do we actually work with the parties who are going to deliver a lot of load into our system, and make sure that we're working with them so that that load doesn't come on at 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. on some days when our load is already projected to peak. So there's, as we think about vehicle electrification and the load that's going to put onto our grid, we want to think about how we manage that load so that we don't end up spiking our peak demand, which would have a negative impact on our return costs.
I mean, to my comments, I would say, I looked at other board members, some of these people are much smarter than me on this issue, but, maybe we could just talk to Amazon and tell them to charge their trucks at 2 in the morning, and give them incentive for doing that. But, I don't know, I feel strongly that if we could help close the gap in some bike ped projects in Alameda County, I think we should do it.
Okay. Great. And lastly, is some charging infrastructure deployment. So as I mentioned, we're starting to look at how we might use our local development reserves. Those local development reserves are funds that we need to create a revenue stream to pay back over time. And the low carbon fuel standards credits that we can get from owning and operating charging infrastructure. How, to answer your point, we need to be creating new fueling stations. We actually don't know what the new fueling station looks like. People are not using gas stations. People go to shopping centers. So, we've been talking with our city counterparts to identify facilities where we could install new charging infrastructure and operate those assets, and then pay back the local development reserve through the low carbon fuel standards credits as well as the electricity revenue from that charging infrastructure. So that's one thing that we're thinking about as kind of a revenue generator that we can use with our local development reserve for. So I think that's all I had tonight.
That's all. Thank you. That's a lot. Appreciate it very much. We have one public speaker, and we might have a few more questions up here. Jessica.
Well, East Bay Clean Power Alliance is very happy to see a lot of these projects taking shape in Alameda County, because this was the vision for years of folks who made up East Bay Clean Power Alliance and some of the folks on the original steering committee. One of the things that has come up is that several of our partner organizations are really interested in working on getting more resiliency hubs in the community, and want to work with East Bay Community Energy to get these resilience hubs in the different communities in Alameda County, because these planned power shutoffs through PG&E will be happening for the next 10 years. And they actually really left a lot of people, and particularly people who are dependent on the electricity, to live in the dark. And I applaud the work of the local development business plan team within East Bay Community Energy. But we really need to do this for communities who do not own their home. Having resiliency hubs in places that are accessible for folks to get to be able to power up is really important. And really thinking about, perhaps even the renters who fall under medical baseline. We do a lot of work also with a lot of folks who are disabled, who could use, power generators or that kind of thing. But mostly the idea of having access to the solar and batteries is really where it's at, because these small generators may last a day or two, and they're often very large. So for a disabled person, it's difficult to actually get them to a place where they can be repowered. So there's all kinds of challenges for various community members. So there's all kinds of ideas that have been proposed by some of the folks that we partner with, and they're very, very eager to create these projects in their communities, and are really looking to working with East Bay Community Energy. And there's obviously an immediate need with those resiliency hubs. Obviously, the microgrids and all these more fancier permanent projects are gonna take time. But if we're gonna be experiencing shut-offs for the next 10 years, particularly around this, fire season seems to be happening every late summer to even into winter sometimes, and so it's very important that we get that going. So again, I want to just reiterate that we want to work with you to make that happen. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Colleagues, any other questions or comments? Yeah. Great. And then-
So, the CAC really also wanted to acknowledge all the hard work, very happy with seeing that. We didn't have a whole lot of time to talk about this. The one thing that we did ask, and we heard that money and budget, if not spent this year, would roll over into next year, which was, if you remember, one of the questions that came up with the budget this year. So just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just my compliments, JP, you and your team are doing a great job, keep up the good work.
Great. Okay, that's it. That's an informational item, so thank you very much for the good work. And our next item is item 13, integrated resource planning. Welcome.
Hi. My name is Marie Fontenot. I'm EBCE's relatively new Senior Director of Power Resources. It's a pleasure to be presenting to all of you for the first time. This is another informational item. Today I'm going to talk to you about EBCE's 2020 Integrated Resource Plan. I'm going to give you some background on it and talk to you about the timeline for when I'm going to be bringing you updates and actually asking you to make decisions on it. So I understand that some of the board members were on the board when EBCE filed its 2018 Integrated Resource Plan. The Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, is a Public Utilities Commission requirement. We have to make this filing every 2 years, and the goal of it is to allow the Public Utilities Commission to consider all electric procurement policies and programs and look ahead at the next 10 years and consider what the system needs, what the system, local, and flexible needs are, so that we can get ahead of those needs and do appropriate long-term procurement. And also to make sure that we're meeting the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. Now, the timeline that the Integrated Resource Plan is following allows the Public Utilities Commission to work with the California Energy Commission to use their Integrated Energy Policy Report, or the IPER. The IPER is the state's official load forecast. It also allows, this timeline also allows the Public Utilities Commission to work with the CAISO, the state, the reliability entity that actually manages the bulk electric system in our energy market, and incorporate the needs that come out of the integrated planning process and funnel that into the CAISO's transmission planning process. So this timeline is important. There are multiple pieces that fit together and are integral to reliability planning. When the last IRP was filed in 2018, it was the Public Utilities Commission's first time doing a filing, or doing an integrated resource plan, I should say. And what they found out of that was that different load-serving entities filed very different approaches to their plans. They had very different model assumptions, and the Public Utilities Commission had a very difficult time making sense of them, integrating them into one master report. So this go around, there are very prescriptive limits on what's actually allowed in our analyses. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But EBCE is actually doing our integrated resource plan together with 3 other CCAs, Clean Power Alliance, Peninsula Clean Energy, and San Jose Clean Energy. We've collectively hired a consultant, Siemens Energy Business, and they are actually performing our modeling and doing the analysis for us. So some of the reasons that we're doing this together, first of all, we will meet the requirement of filing what is referred to as a conforming portfolio. For our filing to meet the CPUC we're all working together to incorporate our respective CCA goals into subsequent analyses. Those will not be filed with the commission, but we'll be able to do a compare and contrast of, what the commission is requiring, what we're doing, and then aspirationally what we want to do to expedite our own CCA goals. Again, the key point here is that to meet our IRB compliance filing requirements, we have to follow the Public Utilities Commission's conforming characteristics. This is a little bit more about the goals for the joint IRP. So the deliverables that I will be bringing to you. The phase 1 deliverable will be the compliance filing. We're delivering this in 2 phases because the information that we're required to use is being released a little bit slower than we had hoped for. We will bring you first what we're required to file, if you will, the minimum analysis, and then at a later date we will come back to you and we'll actually refer to the minimum requirement analysis, and then we'll present you with other options and different approaches so that EBCE can have more aggressive targets to meeting greenhouse gas reduction goals, and that will be a second item that I will ask for your approval on. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about those very prescriptive requirements. So one of the requirements, or an area of requirements, are related to state load and load modifiers. The IPER, the CEC official load forecast that I had just referenced, IPER is the official state load. It also includes the CEC's official forecasts of energy efficiency, demand response, EV penetration, behind the meter generation. For our compliance filing, we are required to use the Energy Commission's numbers. Everything that JP just talked about, all of the work that he's doing, that he wants to have coming online in 2020 and 2021, we're not allowed to incorporate that in our compliance filing. So it's a shortcoming in terms of what we actually plan to do and what we can do in the first analysis to meet our compliance obligation. The second area that I wanted to talk to you about are some key market drivers. This slide nicely demonstrates the interrelated nature of supply and demand side market drivers. For example, if you look at fuel prices and think about the fact that natural gas prices set energy market prices and renewable integration drives energy market prices lower, then further renewable penetration on the system is driving down market prices and making natural gas harder to compete. And that then goes back into the amount of fuel that's consumed, the amount of emissions that actually come out of the bulk electric system. So this is another area where for our compliance filing, we have to use in this case it's the Public Utilities Commission's rather prescriptive forecasts of what fuel prices will be, what percentage of renewable penetration will be, what costs for renewable resources will be, and a variety of other elements. This is my approximate timeline for coming back to you with additional updates and decision-making items. So today is just an informational item. I wanted to give you an overview of what the IRP is, what the process is, why we're splitting it into the CPC compliance filing, and then the later EBCE organizational goal setting initiative. In February, I should be able to come back to you and provide some initial results of our consultant's analysis. In the March timeline, I will be coming back to you with an initial draft of our compliance filing. Ideally, I would request board approval at that time, but to the extent that there are any requested edits or changes, I can come back to you and request final approval as late as April. At this time, May 1st is the Public Utilities Commission's deadline for meeting our Integrated Resource Plan filing obligation. on that date, because the load forecast and other information has come out a little bit late, but I'm not terribly optimistic that we'll actually get it. And then following our compliance filing, I'll come back to you over the summer and give you the results of the supplemental analysis that we've done with Siemens and use that to actually inform what EBCE recommends to the board in terms of setting more aggressive greenhouse gas reductions goals and timelines.
Thank you.
Any questions?
We have public speakers. My colleagues, any questions, comments, concerns?
So I appreciate the phase 2 conversation. I've been asking for us to have that conversation on the early morning. A lot of us are trying to figure out when can we sort of target that 100% greenhouse gas free, or whatever other goals we may agree on. And I'm pleased to hear that it sounds like we're going to be having that conversation throughout this year, concluding by the end of 2020, hopefully.
Yes, I think that is, if ideally it will be even sooner than the end of 2020. I'm setting a low expectation and hoping to exceed it.
Fair enough. So I think this is really critical, because we haven't had that sort of long-term goal or marker set out collectively. I suspect we're going to have a lot of agreement on it, and I suspect that once we come to that agreement to decide where we're trying to get in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, then it will make a lot of the other decisions, the day-to-day decisions, a bit easier. I won't end up worrying about, where are we trying to get to for those sort of short-term decisions. So I'm pleased that we're doing this. I look forward to it, and hopefully everyone will be fully engaged on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate your work. Okay, colleagues, we're moving on to item 14.
No formal presentation, just the memo provided for this one. Item 14 is related to carbon-free allocation. We know this is a topic, of course, that has a lot of interest from the board and our community. There were a set of questions that were provided through the dialogue that we've had over the last month or two on this topic by the CAC and by board members directly. And so this item is sort of a formal write-up that staff has provided to hopefully provide sort of a comprehensive response to each of those questions. We did have a sort of thorough meeting yesterday with the CAC, also reviewing the questions here in detail and kind of responding to them. This is an informational item, so we're just trying to sort of continue the dialogue on this and answer any additional questions coming out of this document and of course what was presented before. I am anticipating that we'll bring forward some formal item to the board perhaps in February or more likely March as a formal action item sort of on this topic. And so nothing for this evening other than to present these sort of questions and responses. As you see from the item, it's a fairly lengthy document, a little over 10 pages. So did not intend to go over every single one, reading the question or response, but sort of ask the board to, if there are any particular questions coming out of this, happy to obviously go through it in any level of detail that's requested. And I'm sure certainly Mary probably has some comments to provide as well, given the dialogue yesterday. So I may just pause there and let the board help sort of guide me in this process. One other thing is just in terms of how we organize the responses, we try to sort of bucket them in similar categories, and I think there was sort of a category of sort of risks and liabilities, a category of costs, a category of power content specifically, and then sort of group the board member questions separately from that, though some of the board member questions, as you'll see in the responses, overlap with some of the CAC questions as well, so just try to be sort of succinct in how we respond.
Thank you. Mary, do you want to present information from the Community Advisory Committee to the public? And then we will take some follow-up questions or comments from board members. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So the CAC continued to spend a fair amount of our time discussing this. We heard 2 items from the public during that time that the CAC did not discuss, but I wanted to bring them up to you. One is that the cost and the time of the regulatory process, the initial amount of money and funding that could be put forward or saved from these allocations is probably going to end up being about half for 2020. one decision, the other was what Jessica already brought up about the nuclear component. So I'm not gonna, shutting down Diablo Canyon. So I'm not gonna go into that anymore because CAC did not discuss that. We did, however, have a couple of things that were new. The first thing, we also really appreciated the time and effort that staff took to answer the plethora of questions that we put forward to them. So we definitely appreciated that. Within this long document, you'll see two tables. And the tables talk about power content. These are estimates by staff. We heard, they're not exact. But one of the things that they appeared to show, which staff seemed to indicate it may happen, is PG&E's natural gas purchases would go up if the CCAs took nuclear option allocation. And this seemed odd to us. It also seemed against, kind of trying, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas. The one item that was really brought forward that what may happen is as PG&E no longer has the nuclear power purchase, they may purchase more dispatchable power from natural gas plants. So we weren't able to talk about this a whole lot, but it was a concept that this information in the request brought out. And so my guess is there will be more discussions on that. The other thing is we did hear directly from our unions. We have two union members on the CAC, SEI 1021, however you pronounce that, are against this, are against a nuclear allocation. And the larger Alameda County Labor Council, that is about 100,000 members, has not, from what we understand, taken a direct stance one way or the other, but it appears to be leaning more towards no nuclear allocation. So that was different. We hadn't heard from our group about that. And then we actually had a couple different questions that were raised based upon the answers already provided. Really is a discussion of the availability of the carbon-free large hydro resources, both in-state and regionally, and how does that relate to meeting our overall goals regarding carbon-free makeup? So we know that this hydro market may be tight because of certain other things. The other component is, again, going back to those tables were not broken into Bright Choice, the Brilliant 100, Renewable 100. Renewable 100 will not have any nuclear, it just can't, given what it's done. So the percentages may look even worse than what they do now from PG&E. And right now it doesn't differentiate terribly much if we take nuclear and hydro than PG&E. Lastly, there was discussion, although not a whole lot, about whether or not there's a potential legislative route that could occur to help really put forward greenhouse gas free.
Mario Alejandro, please come to the front desk. Mario Alejandro to the front desk.
Mandate the CPUC to begin proceedings to assign a value to greenhouse gas free resources such as nuclear or other components, because it's a complex component that's detailed in there, and we weren't sure if that was possible, either within a gut and amend bill or a 2021 session. I am not the legislative person, so this is what I was told, kind of in terms of how one could put a bill forward that way. But if that is even a possibility, if EBCE chooses to take a nuclear allocation, it would undercut this stance. So those are the highlights. That's not everything we talked about, but those are the different things that were brought up at the CAC meeting last night.
Thank you, appreciate that. Thank you for these questions. I'm going to call the speakers now, colleagues. But while we're coming up, if there's a particular answer to a question that you want to have that followed up, either tonight or in the future, in near future, please let us know now or let staff know. And it's important that we have all the questions answered.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 30 minutes. If you need a new library card, please come to the customer service desk at this time.
Yeah, here too.
Before closing,
So,
thank you.
hope you hear something now, you guys.
Atención, por favor. La biblioteca cierra en 30 minutos. Si
So
necesita una
let's
tarjeta
make,
nueva, por
please
favor venga
staff,
al
let's make sure
escritorio
that
de
we
servicio en
have
este momento.
all the
10
questions,
minutos
all the
antes de cerrar,
information
state my appreciation for having this opportunity. My name is Frank Burton. I'm a resident of the city of Hayward. I was also, like many of you, on the advisory committee that designed the JPA that led to EBCE. But tonight I'm speaking just as a member of the public. I'm not representing any organization. I am also representing myself as a recent acquirer of a plug-in hybrid, which happens to fit the needs of my wife and I better than going electric. I know that an electric vehicle is the way we need to go long range, but right now, a plug-in hybrid works for us. I gather that this proposal came from PG&E, and I am pretty suspicious of PG&E. And if you're not suspicious of any proposal that comes from them, I recommend that you become so, because PG&E is looking to maximize their executive compensation and their profits, and that's their focus. And if this came from them, I would be very suspicious that it's going to be advancing their profit and their executive compensation, and is not going to be something that's going to benefit the ratepayers. So I have an inherent suspicion about nuclear because nobody has ever satisfied me on what you do with the nuclear waste. And I'm concerned that this proposal will result in the elongation of Diablo Canyon. And I do not want to see that happen. I want to see it to come out and be decommissioned as soon as possible. I believe, based on what I've seen so far, that this would be a betrayal of trust on the part of the people who designed the JPA, which resulted in EBCE. And I don't see anything in the staff report which talks about the potential damage to the brand of EBCE. Now, there is some information about that, but there's no information that talks about that this could result in a significant PR disaster on the part of EBCE. There's some of us that are strongly opposed to having this, and we will not be quiet about it. So, need to take that into account as you consider this proposal. One thing that actually refers back to the item, a couple of items ago, and that is, I don't spend time in the shopping center. I do the shopping for my wife and I don't spend time in shopping centers though, but I do spend time in grocery stores, in supermarkets, and so that's one of the places where I would advocate that you put charging stations. Thank you.
Thank you. And next speaker, please.
Thanks, Frank. Barbara Stebbins, East Bay Clean Power Alliance. I actually am happy to follow Mary because I don't want to repeat anything she said. And we were there at the advisory committee meeting last night, and it was a very rich conversation, mostly spurred on by the amazing work that the staff had done with providing all these answers to the question. And there were many items that I thought were clarified. Personally, I think they strengthen our arguments for why this is a bad idea. For instance, one issue that had come up, there was some confusion by a member of the public who had asked about whether we're taking just the zero carbon attribute or the actual electricity or energy from Diablo Canyon. That was answered very clearly last night. We are taking the energy along with that attribute of zero carbon. The other thing that got clarified, we've heard many times that this proposed allotment is a one-off. It would expire December 31st, 2020. But what we also heard is that it is part of a larger conversation ongoing at the CPUC around the PCIA and the future of how issues around the PCIA will be resolved and that in a way it is expected to set the stage for what might happen in 2021, 2022, and until Diablo Canyon closes. So even though we have been assured over and over again it would not impact the market for nuclear or the future of Diablo Canyon, that really cannot be said with any certainty. The other thing that is quite clear is that if this is a one-off in which we could not take any nuclear until probably at the earliest May or June, as Mary stated actually, that the actual benefit is about half what is being cited. So rather than 11 million, it's like 5.5 million, maybe. That's as compared to the $90 million that EBCE pays in PCIA charges directly attributable to the $1 billion, over $1 billion of over-market cost of Diablo Canyon every year. Let's see. Oh, even though there is apparently no cost for the energy, which actually has to do with this issue around assigning any benefit, any premium for carbon-free, which the CPUC does not have PG&E do. The fact is, what it will cost us is a right to litigate that very item. If we accept any of the allocation, we forfeit our right to negotiate around whether carbon should have a premium value.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Audrey Ichinose, and I'm a member of a number of organizations, Berkeley Climate Action Coalition, East Bay Clean Power Alliance, and the California Alliance for Community Energy. But of course, I speak for myself. I wanted to point out that the consent item 7, which is the mid-year budget report, shows that after the first half year of operation, EBCE is doing quite well. Is doing better, at least, than projected. We've been, the staff has been cautious, but the budgeting so far seems to be reasonable and solid, if conservative. So going into our first full year with a net position of $50 million, EBCE should continue, I believe, to stay the course along the lines of this year's provisional budget. I hope I'm right in stating that we have already budgeted for non-carbon procurement. So let's not be distracted by the relatively minor budgetary savings, which would accrue if EBCE accepts the proposed allotments of large hydro and nuclear. I think it's clear that the real issue facing us is this year's enormous increase in the PCIA, and what we fear will be repeated increases in years to come. So, given the continuing intractability and impenetrability, in my opinion, of the CPUC methodology, and our lack of confidence in the CPUC as the regulatory body, and the lack of timely legislative remedies, I really think that EBCE and other CCAs and their advocates, of which there are now very many, should consider taking our case with respect to the PCIA to the governor. We know that we could ask him for to help set clear guidelines to allow for change in the overall structure, energy infrastructure in California. We know that the governor is critical of PG&E's plan to exit bankruptcy, especially in the area of governance, and I believe that covers the possibility of a government takeover. So I think this is a fruitful avenue that we should consider, sort of rallying the CCAs all together and opposing the PCIA process and asking the governor for help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And next speaker, please.
Forfeiting, it's redundant.
Okay, Jessica, thank you very much. Okay, colleagues, any questions, comments? We have a lengthy staff report in terms of the Q&A here, and we talked about this at our previous meeting, and we will likely vote on it either next month or no later than the month after. We need to make a decision on this. Yes, anybody? Okay.
Thank you very much for the public comment. It's a very important matter. I think there's a few things, and I really appreciate the staff report. I think there's a lot of good information in there. We can be quiet about it, but I think from a perspective, from a personal, of course, it's one thing to say I don't want any nuclear, but another position is to also look at it as representatives of East Bay Community Energy, what's best for East Bay Community and its membership. So just looking at some of the information, something that stuck out to me here is this comment from the Victory Plan. Policy should encourage the shutdown of nuclear plants, but should generally aim to maintain nuclear power generation until there's enough renewable energy capacity to replace current coal, gas, and nuclear power generation. So, in 2020, California's grid still relies on a significant amount of natural gas, does not yet have the level of renewables and storage to displace the need for gas or nuclear baseload. So the production of carbon-free power from the Klamath Canyon ultimately leads to a lower carbon intensity of power on the California grid than using the alternative natural gas. So I think from my perspective, understanding what is the cost benefit and looking at were we to accept this nuclear power, what would we do with the $5 or $11 million, whatever it might be? Could we invest in more renewable energy? So understanding due diligence, I'm going to try to get out there to the Albert Canyon, understand what it is. I see it as a big power plant, what are the risks? And so I'll send anybody here can go tour it as I understand. But they have some DFE tours available for us. If you all are interested in going, I'll forward off to staff, needs to maybe send you out that notice and their contact if you'd like to. So I guess I would be supportive of the will of the board here. But I think that's what we have to look at. What are the savings? Can we invest those $5 or $10 million, what it is, to procure more renewable energy, so we're less dependent on gas and other carbon gas producing energy for the community. So I think, understanding there's billions of dollars and there's potential for us to save, but maybe invest. So ultimately, it's a bigger picture. How do we sort of bring more renewables online collectively within this group? And so an opportunity for this $5 million is not worth it. I think a lot of what I'm hearing from the community is not worth it. But I think it really depends on this board, and I think it's important to have a robust dialogue here to really hear where it's coming from. And some of it might be an election year, but I think that shouldn't matter. When I ran for city council, I said it's not about being elected, it's about making good decisions for the community, for the people in the room and outside the room. And that's where I'm sort of basing myself on it. But I want to hear from the rest of the colleagues to make sure we're informed, and next month when we come here and speak about this more, and we have more information, that we're all ready to make a unified choice for the benefit of the community and to speak community energy.
Okay, thank you. Jesse.
Thank you. Howard, have you had an opportunity to review the letter from the East Bay Clean Power Alliance that was provided to us this evening? The title is Keeping Diablo Canyon Costs EBCE $90 million a year.
I have not, unfortunately, yet.
This addresses the point that Jessica DeVar made in her initial public comment about the sort of surplus energy costs for operating down the canyon, and they did some kind of analysis on the basis of EBC's share of this excess cost, and they're projecting that accounts for about $1 million PCIA cost in
May I have your attention,
2020.
please? The library will be
So I
closing in
would
15
appreciate if
minutes.
staff can take a
Please
look
come
at this and
to
provide
the
some
Brown Town
information
Checkout
as board
Station.
because I think this
If
is
you need a new library
actually
card,
critical
please
to
come
the
to the
cost
customer
savings
service desk
question.
now. 10 minutes before closing, restrooms
And
will be
then
locked.
moreover,
Computers and printers will shut down.
one comment
Thank
that's
you.
made this evening is,
Su atención, por
given the
favor.
timing of when
La
we'll
biblioteca cierra en 15 minutos. Por favor, traiga los artículos que desea tomar prestados al cajero automático. Si desea una tarjeta nueva, por favor venga al escritorio de servicio en este momento. 10 minutos antes de cerrar, los dueños cerrarán y los computadores y la impresora se
So I
apagarán.
think that would also be
Gracias.
important information for us to have as we're making a decision in the future.
Any other questions or comments? And after tonight, if board members have other questions that they want me to answer before we vote on it, please send your questions to the staff, and they'll do their best to provide answers prior to our next meeting. And the most helpful thing would be to have all the questions you can think of ahead of time, so we have all the information available to us, both from our staff and from the public, when we enter the next meeting, if that is indeed we'll be voting on this. So. Okay.
Sorry, one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I became aware of the fact that there was a letter that was submitted on December 23rd, 2019 from Todd Edmister.
Right here. Our staff.
I guess on behalf of a number of CCAs, regarding approval of Appendix B of carbon-free energy.
That's correct.
I'm addressing this because they're having questions from members of the public about this letter. I'll just note that the last paragraph of the letter does say that the purpose of supporting this is to ensure the availability of choice without taking any position on how any load-serving entity will exercise that choice.
That is correct.
And I appreciate that qualification because we have yet to take a position as to whether we're going to elect to accept this, or if we do accept, what particular attributes we will accept.
Thank you for reiterating that. Yes, our view has always been this should be a board level decision.
And I just
for
want
our
to
other
strongly
CCAs.
encourage staff, as this proceeding is continuing, and that we continue to qualify on the board, the agency's position, because we have yet to take a position as to whether we will accept those attributes or what particular attributes we will particularly accept.
Appreciate the guidance. That is ours.
And can we, thank you for that. Can we make sure that board members have all the background information, even if there was something in our board packet a month ago or 2 months ago? Let's not assume we're going to know or find it or reread it. It'd be important to have it in, if we're voting on it next month, to have that packet, that set of materials be as comprehensive as we've had over the past few months, including outside letters that have been sent to the agency. And it's a lot of reading for us to do, but this is an important decision for us to make, so that's what we did. So, okay, any more comments or questions, colleagues?
Yeah, I'm having a hard
Scott.
time. I thought I read something about it earlier.
Can't hear.
Right there, Mike.
I'm not sure to see if you pull it closer.
Thank you.
I'm pretty sure I read something, but maybe staff can help me because I can't seem to find it now, but is this only like a purchase, a power purchase, or is this, do we accept liability for this facility? I know there was some discussion about earthquakes, and then I'm wondering about shutdown, things like that. So it's only the purchase of the power, we accept no liability for the facility in the event of an earthquake or anything.
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and that is one of the subtopics of the Q&A, but yes, good question.
I know I read it somewhere, but I can't find it now.
Okay, so we're going to move on from this. This will be an important item next month. And let's move on to item 15, also a very important item. Is somebody presenting on this?
Yes, I'm just waiting for the presentation.
Oh, got it. Okay.
This item is related to PCIA. It's certainly important to take into context with our prior item, the power allocation as well, due to the financial implications that will sort of summarize here. So on slide 2, the 2020 PCI forecast, an initial forecast has been provided. And in that forecast, the PCI rates are anticipated to rise up to approximately 60% from where it was in 2019. So you can see the numbers, 2019, the average PCIA across all the different rates customer classes was 0.028 cents per kilowatt hour. The 2020 PCIA is capped 5 cents above that, so 0.033 cents per kilowatt hour. But there is, well, I should also note, PG&E had requested the 2020 PCIA to be 0.045 cents per kilowatt hour. So PG&E is seeking to recover the PCIA above the cap through what's called a trigger. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but that is a sort of summary of the potential financial impact coming from the increase, the likely increase in the PCIA. Some of the causes of that increase are a reduced market prices in 2019. So as we sort of had reviewed throughout the year, some of the sort of hedge costs that we saw, the summary is that it was a fairly mild weather year, 2019. Energy costs were relatively low as a result of that. Obviously, that is a driver of PCIA, given that the other market prices were lower. The other item, of course, in conjunction with that is utility costs were higher than forecasted. So utility and generation costs were higher, combined with the lower PCIA, sort of has this implication. The last piece I'll highlight there is the 2018 PCIA decision that was finalized towards the end of the year. From a sort of a methodology perspective, shifted the billing determinants to increase, to likely increase the PCIA for what is forecasted for 2020. So all of those factors are contributing to what is now a sort of forecasted significant increase to that PCIA. Some of the uncertainties around that increase are related to the trigger itself. So as I noted, there is a cap in place of 5 cents per kilowatt hour. The trigger that is in place specifies that once that cap is exceeded by 10% of the total PCIA revenue requirement, that PG&E or IOUs have a right to go and at least claim with the CPUC to increase the PCIA to start to recover some of those excess PCIA revenues that they're looking to seek. The uncertainty is that the CPUC has yet to rule on if that cap is exceeded and you're starting to approach that trigger, how quickly do you allow for that recovery to occur? When does that take place? Does it get smoothed out over multiple years? That is uncertain at this time. It doesn't necessarily change that the recovery will need to occur, but by spreading it out over some duration of time, you can have a smoothing out of potential volatility that's naturally occurring in the market, where 2019 costs, energy costs, market costs were low. Perhaps 2020 energy market costs are high, and so therefore the recovery would be lower in future years. And so there's an important interplay related to sort of how you allow for that trigger to be managed that has implications for our current fiscal year financial impacts, or the calendar year 2020 financial impacts that are today uncertain, and we knew that was uncertain. The CPUC has yet to rule on that. In terms of the financial implications that we're talking about here related to that potential increase in PCIA, as we all know, we have a 1.5% discount, and so EBCE revenues, fairly straightforward. You take that haircut, that discount off of those PG&E rates, and then you subtract out the PCIA. So an increase in the PCIA and a decrease in PG&E rates has a compounding effect on our financials, and that increase in PCIA by 60% and decrease in PG&E gen rates forecasted at 11%. We estimate to have a result of about 28% decrease in EBCE revenue relative to sort of what we're forecasting. So very material impact potentially coming from these results.
Is that in dollar terms, please? Ballpark?
We're a ballpark of $500 million a year organization, so we're talking over $100
Which is more than our
Profit
profit.
our current
This year.
reserves and profit, that's correct. So very significant. While we've certainly looked at our financials over the course of the last 4.5 years, it has been very healthy. This is a very significant number potentially. The last bullet there, the CPC action on the 2020 PCIA at this stage cannot occur before February 27th, 2020, so we don't have an update on the latest there. That's the earliest that could occur. Assuming that is the case and it's not kind of further delayed, then that implementation expected to happen May 1st, 2020. The last, oops, sorry, last slide here. So what are we doing about this? We're of course very active in the regulatory space in sort of opposing the PG&E numbers that they had put out there at the end of 2019. So actively working with the CPUC to sort of argue that methodology and the proposal there. We're also actively kind of working through this issue of the year-to-year volatility of PCIA related to the cap and the trigger. And so, one benefit, of course, is to, as is known, the CPUC still needs to rule on how to sort of treat that trigger. There are more favorable outcomes for EBCE where you may be able to sort of defer some of that with some expectation that, there'll be some smoothing out of the recovery of the PCIA in that instance. Of course, we're also evaluating ways to reduce our costs. And part of that is looking at what is our discount rate, what is our power content, what do we do with programs, overhead. It is a significant amount of money, of course, and so we look at all of the above type of options in order to really mitigate some of the impacts of that if it is on the sort of upper end of that kind of range of impact. And obviously the discussion on nuclear is just one small piece of what we could consider to help kind of mitigate those impacts. And then of course the last bullet, which we just sort of touched on, is yes, it's been relatively healthy, but when you look at our financial performance for 2018 and 2019, we have a little over $50 million in unrestricted cash and about $40 million in formal reserves. And so that is a healthy amount, but you can see, sort of compared to the potential implication for the PCI increase, it's not quite enough.
Thank you. Is that it?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. I'll start. What's the timeline for the PG&E request of the rate? Is that has the trigger hasn't been hit yet?
The trigger has not been hit yet.
So they're anticipating.
This is all based off of a forecast that they provided initially in 2019.
Right.
Now has kind of gone back to the CPUC for, based on comments that we've provided to push back on that. And so we're waiting for an updated proposal from the CPUC, which we're anticipating no earlier than February 27th.
I'm sorry, what's the date?
February 27th.
Got it, okay. And then the phase 2 proceeding is still in progress, is that right? For PCIA?
Yeah.
Please.
Todd's really the resident expert.
Yes. You should lift the microphone up there.
Yeah, I could be like this the whole time.
Yeah, okay. There you go.
Yeah, hi, Todd Edmister, I'm Reg Affairs Director for East Bay Community Energy. Your question related to PCIA Phase 2?
Phase 2, and that's still in progress, I believe, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And are there elements yet to be decided that could then have the effect of changing this whole potential large increase?
Well, they won't change the potential large
Not for this year.
increase. Yeah, there are potentially some big structural changes for 2021, which may help us in 2021, depending on where things shake out in terms of how the new methodology for getting assets out of the utility portfolios and in the hands of the new folks that are serving load, basically us, pan out, that could significantly change how PCIA works. But we're still going to be facing an undercollection coming out of 2020 because we have the structure that we do for this year, and we will be the cap rate, and there will be some undercollection associated with that.
Okay, thank you. And is there any chance, if it's next year or the year after, that the utility-owned generation element of the PCAA can be revisited and we can kind of get rid of that?
Yeah, well, one update I can provide for you, so last month when we were talking about this a little bit, I told you that there was a litigation effort to pull utility owned generation, UOG as we call it, out of the utility portfolio. We had lost at the sort of the trial court level of the PUC. We had a rehearing application. Just yesterday, we got the rehearing decision from the PUC, which rejected our arguments on that. So now we have a 60-day window to decide whether we want to take this, we collectively, CalCCA, want to take this to the appellate court. But at least for now, we don't have further options. The PUC to get UOG out of the PCIA calculation. There is a possibility of getting some of the assets out of the PCIA coming out of phase 2, but it would be essentially an assignment, right? If there was some contract in the portfolio that was both attractive to a new load serving entity and had a generator or owner of the facility, holder of the contract, what have you, that wanted for some reason to do a deal with somebody other than PG&E. One of the things that's going to be proposed in phase 2 and hopefully adopted by the commission is a mechanism for making that assignment happen. So that's another possible route for getting some of these assets just shifted wholesale out of the utility, but that's the state of play.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any more comments or questions? This is a big deal. We have some decisions. Based on what Nick told me, we have some decisions to make soon about how we adjust the different options, how we adjust something or some things in order to make sure we balance our budget and keep providing power. And well, I assume my understanding is we're going to have options or a suite of options to look at and then decide as to how we make those adjustments to balance our budget. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. As
None of them are going to be good options.
Yeah, we don't like the potential outcome that could happen here. There is uncertainty, of course, as to where some of these figures will end up, but we can see the magnitude has the potential to be something very significant. So we're certainly evaluating every possible option to put it on the table and present that to the board for consideration. Of course, this is not an action item tonight. As you noted, we're going to definitely need to bring this back for very serious conversations following this meeting. Based off of the timing for when we could get an update from the CPUC, I'm not anticipating we'll have a meaningful update in February, correct?
It's not looking like it. I mean, the timing was such that we were expecting to receive what's called a proposed decision from the PUC. Really 2 weeks ago, they didn't issue one. If we'd seen one today, we might have seen an actual formal decision in mid-March. That hasn't happened yet. So I think now we're looking at a May rate change as the earliest date, and it may be kicked further down the road. We definitely gave the PUC something to think about, and they're thinking that's pushed all of the dates back.
And without a proposed decision, there's not new information to help inform what the potential impact is. So while we could bring back some preliminary options to start thinking about in February, we won't have an update on the actual PCI impact until early as March. It sounds like it obviously always has the potential to get further.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers that we're working from right now, we think are the worst case. We can kind of only go down from what PG&E had proposed, but it's still not the realistic case. And we really won't have a better sense of that until we see the proposed decision and then ultimately an actual decision.
Okay. It would be, I think it'd be helpful for all of us as we're leading up to a decision that we have to make on how we make adjustments to whatever the things are that we could possibly adjust, to have that kind of in effect workshop at the board itself, so it doesn't happen all of a sudden. Oh, here's your options. By the way, you didn't read it last week in the packet. Let's have it come to us over a period of time, so we can have plenty of time to think about it, and the public have plenty of time to see what our options are as well. Colleagues, questions, comments?
I'm wondering what we can do as a board in terms. This seems to me as to be potentially a killer for the EBCE and other CCAs, and I don't believe that's the direction the public would like to go. It's not the direction the government would like to go. I'm wondering about what we can do to take some public action with regard to that. I don't know that you're the right person to ask,
I'm one of the right people. You're right in terms of is ringing alarm bells for the CCA community as a whole, and there are efforts underway to establish, a broader legislative outreach, which would be Melissa's ballpark, a public relations outreach, which right now is being led by San Jose, and obviously we're involved in that. We have been taking the labor more on the regulatory side, trying to minimize the hurt coming out of this with the numbers. So I think those are sort of the three major forums, but yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm not sure where the place to have that conversation amongst us would make the most sense, but there are efforts underway.
I think we'll include that just in terms of options to consider as we're sort of evaluating all options. Those actions would be hard to have a very immediate impact, but obviously those efforts were made in the whole PCIA methodology setting back in 2018. Now that those numbers are getting more realized, refreshing all that and having perhaps that dialogue from a public legislative perspective, policy perspective, we're going to exhaust every option we have, so we'll present some of those ideas too.
Well, so, I just wanted to follow up on that. I'm just thinking about the discussion earlier this evening that was Jessica Tovar brought up, but with regard to the medical, I just lost the words.
Medical baseline?
The taking care of people when power goes out, just lost the words for that. Yes. And in the sense that PG&E is turning off the power, and there's a way we can keep it on and make that case, it seems to me to be a powerful argument for this.
So, this is not a CEC thing, this is just one that I have for staff. The timing of bringing it all together and having all the options, and the discussion we were just having about nuclear allocation. I'm assuming, there are cost ramifications there that may help with some of this. I imagine that's part of, and perhaps one of the options. Is the timing going to work to when you need to make a choice on the nuclear or hydro allocation, and any of the workshop that we're talking about in terms of how EBCE may want to move forward and understand all their options?
We hope so. We certainly want to be able to set the stage for what the financial implications of the PCA are, and have that be a part of making a decision on the nuclear allocation piece. As we noted with the time frame here, it's been slipping on the PCIA, is what I'm referring to, and has the potential to continue to slip. And so, if it does, we may be the unfortunate position where we have to make a decision on the allocation before we actually know the PCIA impacts. That may just be a reality of how that sort of is getting structured and the timing of things.
Yeah, I mean, you have something of a grace period by virtue of the cap. Okay, the cap is going to be in place for some period of months. Right? Even if you do the worst case analysis, you know that you can't hit the trigger amount until some months have passed. You don't know exactly how many months that's going to be, but that does definitely buy you some time to react.
Just for my sense, it seems like we can either look at it like a mortgage. This is what we do borrow to PG&E. Looks like we have a variable mortgage, which sucks. We want it more fixed. So how do we get to that fixed mortgage? I really understand what it is for us when that has this variability. So how do we negotiate that with them? I mean, they know they're in a position that they want to get all this money. How do we sort of, for their bankruptcy, how do we sort of get a fixed mortgage so we have more certainty with these people? I just want to make it real simple. How do we get there? Because right now it's variable, and that's how we end up underwater, homeless, everything, which is what we're talking about here with EBCE. Come on, there. Welcome aboard, now you're gone. So we don't want that. So how do we get to that fixed environment with them? Do we negotiate with the CCA? What is it? Can we just get out of this or forget it? We're not going to pay you. Too bad. What are you going to do about it? So what are our true options to really leverage our muscle, that we have the people behind us, and we want to survive and thrive with renewable energy? So that's really the question I have, because it can get complex and caps and 10% this or this and that, but let's baseline it, figure out what can we do, just really understand what it is that we're going to owe them, and not change it, and just agree to, that's it, and then figure out our payment plan. I mean, from the real estate background I have, that's what I know. So what's our mortgage?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Easy question, right?
Well, there have been efforts in that vein. So phase 2 of the BCIA had 3 working groups, right? So working group 1 was sort of operationalizing the December 2018 decision. Working group 2 was prepayment, exactly what you're describing, right? And that ended up not really going anywhere because PG&E was not willing to take on that, essentially that risk, right? Especially when they could offload it. And the commission has not been willing to make them take on that risk.
So then we have to lobby our legislators to.
That's probably, I mean, I'm sure I'm the right guy, right? But
no, I'm just looking at the right
yeah.
I know the library's closed, so hopefully we have a grace period here.
Yeah, so I'll just add really quickly, certainly this is something that we are looking at, what our legislative options are. But what I would note is that we also lobbied this pretty hard back in 2018 when we got the unfavorable decision. We had legislators writing letters to the CPUC, and then even in the fallout of that decision though, we heard a lot in Sacramento that folks were sick of hearing about PCIA, they were sick of hearing about CCA customers versus PG&E's bundled customers. And at the end of the day, they wanted to make sure that we weren't shifting costs to PG&E's bundled customers. And unfortunately, that's the narrative they've been hearing from the utilities for years. And it's really hard to kind of change their minds and say, well, we don't want to shift costs either. The devil's in the details and we disagree about the methodology. You start going there, you lose them. Talking about our great programs doesn't cut it in Sacramento because the response back is, well, it's great that you guys can have this wonderful renewable energy, but you can't do that at the expense of the bundled customer. So what we really have to focus on is somehow helping tell the story that it's not about us being subsidized, but it's about us paying our fair share and no more than that.
Then we're a better program, we're not gonna turn the lights off, we're gonna be resilient, we're gonna take care of the people who are more like, the mental baseline people and figure out our story.
Okay, more questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, thank you for the presentation and the not so good news, but that's okay, that's the way it is. We'll have some tough decisions to make on this in the next few months, so thank you for that. What's next? Do we have anything else on the agenda? 16, meeting schedule.
It's just an informational item, and we wanted to point out that CAC will be traveling during this year. In March, they'll be in Dublin, and July, Berkeley, and in October in Union City. And if possible, if the board members can swing by and say hello, we'll let you know ahead of time of the meeting. And as you know, meetings can change, so please keep an eye on the actual agenda for the meeting location.
So I
Yes, Alfred.
I couldn't find the schedule. It's not on the website. It wasn't in the full board packet. So if you could make sure that it's.
Yeah, we also didn't have the minutes that we were voting on in the online packet. Paper packet that was over there
It was
So-
emailed also separately to the board.
So I looked, I couldn't find it. So if you would make sure that it is posted to the website and maybe resend the email, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. It was attached to the meeting email. I forwarded it.
Thank you, appreciate it. Possibly the meeting schedule, this is a great meeting schedule, colorful chart for the rest of the year. That could be a separate link somewhere on the website, you know, the meetings and what have you. Yeah.
Tiny question. The marketing meeting is listed here as being at 3 o'clock. The schedule you sent out said 11 to 1. Could you
11 to
just-
when?
11 to 1.
11 to 1, okay.
Could you just clarify which of those it is? Not
Sure.
clear, but
You, definitely.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Stephanie, for all your good work. Appreciate that very much. Okay, no more questions on this. We have another item here. Okay, board member staff announcements. I have a quick announcement. Remind myself of the date. County Supervisor Nate Miley and Mayor Schaff and myself are hosting or sponsoring I'm looking for the date of the calendar, sorry. A panel discussion or town hall, what we're gonna call it. I believe it's on February 10th at Oakland City Hall called The Future of Energy Resilience or Resiliency. mostly about PG&E. It'll cover multiple topics. Probably just kind of what's the future of PG&E? Should there be some kind of ratepayer owned cooperative, public power, some restructuring where they're not the way they look now? How's the impact of the public safety power shutoffs? How does that impact residents? What the solutions are? It'll deal with a multitude of things. And so, if there's information that this agency would like to share, I'll be there. So it'd be great to have that information ahead of time, and I can talk to staff in advance. That's February 10th, 6 o'clock at Oakland City Hall. Also want to acknowledge that we are here in a public library, so I want to remind people that if you ever have questions, you could put them into your Google search engine and get 100,000 responses, or you could ask your librarian and get the right one. Any other announcements, colleagues? Okay, we are